Thank you very much. Thank you very much for showing up at this late stage of Decoded. So we are here to talk about the empowering, or about empowering the community, and we will show you a little bit why we think that the Decentralized Voices program of the Web3 Foundation has had a very positive impact on OPENGOV. My name is Jonas, and I'm here with my colleague RAFFAEL. So let's start by just telling you a little bit about what is DV. Actually, who here participates actively in OPENGOV? Okay, who's here has no idea what POLKADOT OPENGOV is? Oh, that's nice. Very cool. So yeah, we have this decentralized voting system, right, where you can vote with dots. People can make proposals, and basically, the Web3 Foundation initiated a program that is called Decentralized Voices to increase the decentralization of Polkadot and Kusama. And the goal was actually to empower passionate and knowledgeable individuals in OPENGOV. So they were very active, but the voting power that they have is potentially very small, right? Because you basically vote with your dots. So the whole idea of this was to empower those individuals, give them a lot of dots to vote and to actually affect the outcome in OPENGOV. So what happened is that 7 times 1 million dot was delegated at 6 times conviction. And in Polkadot, it is like the conviction multiplies the voting power. So in a sense, 7 individuals were able to vote with 6 million dots in OPENGOV. On Kusama, we had 6 times 5,000 KSM, also at 6 times conviction. And the delegation of the whole program is rotated every 3 months. The cohort 1 is actually already over and successfully over. And we will also be investigating mostly this one because the second one is ongoing, but it's very early on. So who are the delegates? They are well-known community members. Among them is Chaos DAO, Jimmy Tedeschi, Kukabi, POLKADOT'S, Polka World, Sachsenberg, and William. And these were the individuals that were entrusted with this kind of delegation. Our goal in the report that we will also be sharing at the end and in this analysis is to basically understand 2 main questions, or 2 main research questions. The first one is how did the delegates vote? And we have different dimensions here. And also what impact does this Decentralized Voices program had on the whole OPENGOV landscape. So let's start. I will present the first, the results of the first question. Let's talk about the delegates' behavior. And here we have different dimensions. The first one is turnout. So how often did delegates actually vote? I think there were maybe 100 proposals in the time when they were active, maybe even more. And this only works, of course, if they show up and actually submit their vote, right? Otherwise, they don't have any impact here. Then we also wanted to see the voting direction. So how did they actually vote once they voted? The possibilities were basically not showing up, saying A, nay, and abstain. And then also a very interesting thing or analysis is their alignment. So how often did they actually align in voting? How often did they vote the same way? And who actually aligned the most or the least among them? We focus here on controversial referenda because those are the ones that have some opinion to them, right? So sometimes a proposal is submitted, but there's some error in it, and basically everybody should just vote it down. And it's not really interesting to check how the people voted in these kind of referendums because there's no opinion. Everybody agrees it was a wrong proposal, a wrong pre-image or something. Just don't vote for it. So we actually wanted to see controversial referenda, and this is kind of a little bit difficult to determine, but we decided to go for these that had 20% approval of those that were rejected, right? So there were at least 20% of the voters that showed up that were actually thinking, oh no, this should have been accepted, right? So there was some controversy here. And then, of course, it's symmetrically on the other side where we have under 80% approval despite being accepted. So there was some significant amount of people that said it should have been rejected, but it was actually accepted. And in this data that we present you, we focus on Polkadot. So let's look at the first one, turnout. And here we have the different delegates, and we have the number of votes and the percentage of how many, of all the referendums that they showed up. And remember, those are the controversial referenda. It's not all the referenda that they voted for. And we could see that we had some significant amount of votes, right? You have to remember these are like more than 100 referenda, which is quite a lot of work to actually keep up with and show up and work and vote. And yeah, we have some, for example, Chaos DAO and Sachsenberg, which almost voted in all of the referenda, which is really nice. But even the ones that are on the lower end still showed up to a significant amount of referenda. The next one is behavior, and here it's kind of interesting to see how kind of maybe progressive or conservative the different delegates are. And for example, Chaos DAO were like only with a 21% or 22% of A votes. So they have like this kind of tendency to rather say nay to a referendum, whereas like other people like POLKADOT or Sachsenberg were a little bit more on the positive side, and like they were more likely to spend funds. And I think what is important here is that it's not about evaluating whether it's good to vote more A or nay. It's about to show that there's a diversity in opinion here. So like these delegates don't like all vote the same, or they don't all pass everything, or they don't all reject everything, but there's actually some room for different opinion here. And I think this also allows other people in the ecosystem to find their delegates which they most agree on. Then the next one is the voter alignment, which I think is very interesting. This is a matrix where all the delegates are in the rows and columns. And we can basically understand how often, if they voted, did they vote the same way. And naturally, the diagonal is like not available because it's the cross-section of them. But here we can also see that there's some of the delegates overlapped quite significantly. For example, let's say Polka and Jimmy Tedeschi, for example, or like POLKADOT'S and Jimmy Tedeschi voted 81% of the times the same. But there's also like significant disagreement of, for example, Kukabi and POLKADOT, where they only voted the same in 31% of the cases. And what I want to highlight here again is that it's actually nice to see that there's diversity, right? This is what we want in OpenGov. We don't want to, and certainly the Web3 Foundation doesn't want to delegate to a different amount of people that all vote the same, right? We want to have diversity. We want to have disagreement to get the best outcomes. Actually, I think this is, when I was doing this, I found it so interesting that I was like putting my own history into this matrix and was checking which of the delegates I'm mostly overlapping with to make a decision where to delegate my dots. And I was talking to, I think, PolkAssembly about the fact that this would be a very nice tool to have, right? Like you log into PolkAssembly, you say, I want to delegate, and then it takes your voting history and proposes a delegate that mostly matches with you, or that has the highest overlap. And that, I think, would be a nice way to make it easy to find the delegate of your choice. So let me give the mic to RAFFAEL that talks about the second part of it.
All right. So to better understand what is actually going on in the second half, I would like to point your attention first to this little infographic. I guess all of you that have listened to such talks have already met Alice and Bob. In this case, we also need Charlie. In total, let's consider a number of tokens that is 100, and that is distributed in this way. So Alice has 49 tokens or shares, Bob has 45 tokens, and Charlie has 6 tokens. So the rules of the systems in this case are that a simple majority is required, which means that 51 tokens are actually enough to win a vote. So if you just go by the pure token voting weight, then Alice and Bob would have much more weight than Charlie. But if you consider which coalitions can actually win a vote, then all of them are equally likely. So Alice and Bob can win a vote, Bob and Charlie can win a vote against Alice, and Alice and Charlie can also win a vote. And there's also the last coalition. If they all vote the same way, then of course they also win the vote by the rules of the game. So to make sense of how much power each actor in this system actually has, we need something else rather than just voting weight. And one way you can do that is called the Banzhaf Power Index, which is actually something that has been used, for example, in traditional companies limited by shares, or in even political structures like the UN Security Council, to analyze how the power structures in these systems are. So you can use it whenever you're talking about a weighted voting game theoretically. So we did that for Polkadot, which is actually one of the most interesting and most transparent voting systems that are out there. And we looked at the situation first before the DVs were introduced by track. And the way you do this is you have a certain look-back period. In our case, we looked back 90 days. We looked at all the addresses that have voted in that period. And this is what we consider the active electorate of dot holders. So those are the dots that we consider to be active in governance. And if you go through that, you can see that actually before the introduction of the Decentralized Voices program, the top 3 voters were extremely powerful. So that is 14DN, 16DG, and 14ZP. I guess the actual identities of those are known to those that follow OpenGov very closely, at least for 2 of them. But those 3 together already had almost 50% of the entire vote. So if they collaborate, any vote could basically be pushed through. And the turnout was standing at 175 million dot. So that's not so bad, but it's also not so much when we then check later what actually happened after Decentralized Voices was introduced, which is what we see here. So this is the power structure after Decentralized Voices. And we see that, first of all, there is now 273 million dots voting on referenda in the medium spender track, which is much more than those 42 million that were introduced by the Decentralized Voices program. And if we look at the power distribution, that also got much better. The top 3 voters now only have like 37%, so it's not enough for them to collaborate, to basically work together to overturn any vote. But on the other hand, the decentralized voices are also not, or were also not, too powerful, because their power was at 2.2% per decentralized voice. So overall, with 7 delegates, then you had something like 15% that was allocated through the Decentralized Voices program to empower the community. Now, another analysis that you can do that is very interesting, and that is typically done on wealth distribution and not voting power distribution, is the Gini coefficient. And the way that you can illustrate this is shown here. So you have the cumulative share of voters on the x-axis and the cumulative share of voting power on the y-axis. If every voter has the same voting power, then this would be just a straight line going up. And the more the worse the distribution is, the more this distance from this perfect straight line is. And we can also see that before the Decentralized Voices program, we had a Gini coefficient of 0.76. versus afterwards when it was 0.67. So, and lower is better in this case. So we got to a better distributed system after decentralized voices. All right, and now we can also do the same analysis on the big spender track, where actually the effect was even larger. Before the introduction of decentralized voices, so we're speaking January of this year, the total electorate in this case was around 86 million that were actively voting on this track. And the most powerful voter, 16DG, actually had a total weight of about 1/3, but a power of 40%. So he didn't need many other whales or large voters to convince them to actually push through a vote on the big spender track. And also an interesting effect of this difference between voting weight as determined by tokens versus actual voting power can be seen between the second most powerful whale, the 14ZP, and the third most powerful whale, the 16ZW, because they actually have very different voting weights. So one was voting with 12 million dots, and the other was voting with 18 million dots, but their power was roughly equal. And if you now check the total voting dots, 86 million, divide that by 2, which is necessary to win any vote, you can see that the combination of either the 16DG or 14ZP is enough to win a vote. So they are roughly equal in power, or almost enough to win a vote in the case of the third one, which is why if you extend it to many decimals, he's slightly less powerful, but it's not meaningful in the real life context. After the introduction of decentralized voices, it got much better, and Big Spender was actually one of the most active tracks that people were voting on. We saw some very controversial referenda, which I will show in just a moment. And the total electorate got up to 361 million and the power of the decentralized voices was actually only 1.7%. So with an additional introduction of these 42 million by the Web3 Foundation in this case, to this big spender track, many more whales decided to come out and that it was worth to vote. Maybe also because there were many more controversial referenda during that time period. So one of them was the Chainalysis analytics solution, which got rejected by a very, very small margin in the end and had about 190 million coming out to vote. And even closer was the incentivization of Interlay IBTC, which was really roughly at 50% and more than 200 million coming out to vote. And as you would expect, also comparing just the numbers from before and after, we have a Gini coefficient of 0.8 versus 0.63 after the introduction. So it means that the power is actually much more distributed after the program was introduced. Now, a last interesting thing that you could do, or you could also build a tool for, is if you are a whale, you would probably want to do some analysis whether it's actually worth to increase your conviction or not. So what we did here is to construct a conviction heat map, where you have the amount of dot in millions on the x-axis, you have the conviction on the y-axis, and you have a color-coded amount of power. And you can basically quickly see that it's only really a relevant question really for the largest whales that have a large impact when they change their conviction. And keeping everything else the same, if 14DN would increase his conviction to 6x, he could get 20%, 21% of the total power. And for 15QU, he is currently already at 4x conviction, but could also get up to roughly 21% voting power by going to 6x conviction. So this could also be a useful tool, especially for whale voters, to decide whether it's actually worth to increase the conviction, and also for the smaller voters, but in this case, it probably won't have this much of an impact, as we can see for these large whales. Now, To conclude, we would say that this has been an extremely successful first cohort. We saw high turnouts by the decentralized voices and mixed voting behavior, which is exactly what you would like to see if your goal is to actually empower the community. The overall impact on OpenGov has also been very positive. There are more dots voting, the voting power is better distributed, and there are actually many more dots that came in and decided to participate actively in OpenGov beyond those dots that were just added through the delegations of the foundation. And the last point is that the off-chain discourse, of course, also remains extremely important, and this is also the only way that you can basically make a very strong impact still as a smaller dot holder by talking to whales, coming up with great arguments to convince them to actually vote in a certain direction. Yeah, so that was it. Thank you very much, and we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jonas, RAFFAEL. So let's hear the voices of the people.
Hello. Well, thank you for showing this transparent report here. Basically, you're telling us that the Satoshi coefficient was at 2 before the DV program, because 2 accounts were enough to win a big spender. Now, you seem to have counteracted plutocracy with something which might be seen as a disease in itself, because now the Web3 Foundation is picking their favorites to be DVs. Now, with all the transparency that you have provided, can you talk a bit more about how that selection process of DVs works, and what does it take to get to kick out someone? And yeah, maybe you can comment a bit on that.
That's a good question. Actually, I'm not too much into the selection process. You would want to ask Bill here. But I think the stated goal is to not pick people based on what the Web3 Foundation thinks how they should be voting, but more about activeness in the community. And I think it's very important to have this kind of report to actually see that they are not all voting the same, which could be, of course, a proxy, right? Like if we saw that all of them voted the same, you could make the argument that maybe the Web3 Foundation was selecting them in a way, or even like have some direct line to them. And in that sense, the stated goal of this program is to not select these people based on these criteria, but like empower voices that are very present. And of course, that is a promise, and your trust assumption is based on Web3 Foundation and the data that you can see, right? And I think as long as we can show that the alignment is not at all perfect between the delegates, I think we can make a very good point that they don't just vote on behalf of the Web3 Foundation.
All right. Another question? So you are representing a very important initiative of the ecosystem, because a lot of people now have a lot of attention in the DV program. Yeah. So,
hi, yeah, short question. How do we incentivize that also smaller investors or dot holders are also participating in OpenGov?
I think this is a very big topic. Incentivizing voting is heavily discussed everywhere in academia, and like, of course, it goes back in history. How do you incentivize voters? My personal opinion is that you should not incentivize them to vote, because that will be gamed, right? Like you make a bot that votes based on the consensus, or that votes always no, or whatever. So I think what we should do is like work to remove barriers to vote. I think people that want to vote should have it as easy as possible to vote, and that means having nice UI, nice UX, make it cheap to vote, which is probably the case on Polkadot, and you know, like remove barriers to vote. I think that is the most important part here.
All right. Another question? What? I think the program.
Maybe one thing I wanted to say,
Yeah,
a lot
course.
of the stuff that we presented is compiled in a report that has this, I think, even the same name as the talk. So feel free to find it in the internet. You will, at Web3 Foundation on Medium, you will immediately find it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.